Welcome back to our channel. If you have a big garden on your homestead, you know how important it is to preserve the excess food you grow. Today we're going to show you an old school method of how to preserve your fresh vegetables. Let's go. Of course, we're talking about lacto fermentation, or the original pickling. Now, the modern pickled cucumbers and other items in the store aren't actually done using the original brining process. They are done using a vinegar solution, which isn't very good for your gut health. Those store-bought pickles also contain high levels of sugars and dyes, and they also have a higher sodium content than the original pickling method. So here's the cool thing about this method. It actually increases the good bacteria that is good for your gut health. Now, as always, I want you to do your own research on everything I tell you. But this method is easy to do, and it will create some very tasty vegetables that I believe are good for you. These lacto-fermented veggies retain their crunchiness. They have a nice level of sourness to them, depending on how long you leave them. And their saltiness is at a perfect level for almost anybody. Now I know what you're saying. Wait a minute, lactose sounds like milk. Well, no, it's completely different. This is talking about lactic acid, which is one of the byproducts of the process when you brine in the salt solution your vegetables. And using that brine kills off any bad bacteria that is inside and around your veggies. But it lets the good bacteria, the lactobacillus probiotic bacteria, flourish. Another beautiful thing about this process is that you only need a few simple ingredients. Your veggies, filtered water, and some good salt. Make sure you use some sort of sea salt and not an iodized table salt that has all the minerals taken out of it. We love using this Celtic sea salt. It is incredibly flavorful. Of course, we know salt is a disinfectant, and if you're on your homestead, you should have plenty of salt on hand. There are a couple of very important steps that you have to get right in this process, or it's not going to work out really well. One is the percentage of salt in the water, and the other one is the air at the top of the jar. If the veggies are sticking out of the water up into the air, you're going to get mold growth. And you don't want that. You'll just have to get rid of the entire batch. Now, there is something that can form on the top of the water called comm yeast. The comm yeast is okay. I'm going to put a picture of it right here for you. It's not bad for you. You can skim it off the top of the water and throw it away. No big deal. What you don't want is mold. Now remember, mold has little fine hairs that grow off of it. So it's pretty easy to distinguish between the comm yeast and the mold. Now let's talk about how long these can last. Well, different veggies last for different periods of time. Cucumbers are a little bit softer, so without refrigeration, these will stay out and last and still be good for about 2 months. If you have something like carrots or beets, they will last 6 to 7 months. And the whole idea behind this is to preserve your veggies for continuous eating between seasons. This is not a long-term storage method. For example, with cucumbers, after the 2 months is up, you're going to need to store them in the refrigerator. They'll last for another 6 months in the fridge, but I'm sure you're going to eat them up quite quickly as they're delicious. So garlic and onions also work very well for this process. We've always been looking for ways to preserve our small onions that come out of the garden because obviously all of them don't grow the same size. Small ones are much more difficult to preserve, and this is a great method for that. Now, this process works for most veggies. However, the ones that are easier to do, that take to the process the best, are the ones with the hardest consistency, like carrots and beets. But things that also work well for this process are asparagus, obviously cucumbers, peppers, the onions and garlic, and of course cabbage. Cauliflower does well with this process because of its hard consistency, but its cousin broccoli actually doesn't do well at all. Now, it is extremely important that you have the perfect percentage of salt in your water. And the only way to achieve that is with a scale. You can pick these up quite cheap. And weighing things is really the only way to do it, because if you go by volume, different salts have different flakiness, the different densities, different lightness. It's not going to work out well. You need the scale. Now, I mentioned keeping air away from the vegetables because this is an anaerobic process. So you want to keep them submerged under the water. Vegetables have a tendency to float, so you're going to need to push them down somehow into the salt solution. Now Ball makes these fermenting lids and this spring. They come together in a package. I'll put it in the description below. And what it does is obviously pushes down and pushes the veggies under the water. And on the top here, it has a little burp valve, I guess you could say. It lets the gases that are being created out. Now that's really important because if you're just using a regular top, you do not want to tighten it down really at all. Just a tiny bit so that the gases can escape, or this jar is going to become a bomb in your kitchen and you don't want that. This kind of jar was used in the past and you can use this. The lid just sits on the top of it. So when the gases build up, it'll just push the top up and let the gases escape. Now if you're using something like this, you're going to need something quite large to hold those veggies underneath the brine. What we found is using a saucer flipped up like this sets down in there perfectly and keeps everything submerged. I just picked this one up at Walmart. They're pretty easy to find. Now using a wide mouth jar is best for this process. Not only is it going to give you more space to get your veggie down in there, but it's going to let you take things like this that you have laying around in your kitchen to weigh the veggies down. Now, if you don't have this spring system and you don't want to buy it, you can find little ceramic things, non-metallic things like this, to put and weigh down on your veggies. But there's also another really neat trick that is actually really cheap, and that's a bag full of water. It works really well holding those veggies down on the top, and if you do it properly, you can just hang it over the side like that, barely tighten the top, and that's going to let the gases out also. So let's get to the steps of the process itself. First step, wash your veggies. Next step is to cut them into pieces so they better fit and fill out the jars. Now with things like carrots, you can peel them if you like, but since we grow organic, I'm not really worried about it at all. Now when you're cutting your veggies, you want to make sure that they're not too tall. Obviously you need that water over the top, so we're going to trim these two up a little bit more. And obviously with your asparagus, it's got to fit down perfectly. Now if you don't have enough tall jars, you can absolutely utilize smaller jars like this pint. And that works well with peppers because we like to slice them in rounds like this for fermenting. And obviously the things like the pearl onions and garlic are super simple. Just drop them in whole. Once we have all of our veggies that we want to ferment, it's time to get weighing on the scale. Now to do this properly, we are going to have to empty our veggies out. We're going to place our jar or whichever container it is that you're using on the scale and zero it out. That way we can calculate the weight of the water and the veggies only and not the jar. Veggies go back in. Then we're going to add our water until it comes over the top of them. You can see that if I push these down, the water is still going to be over the top, so we're good. Now our total weight is 412. So you can just take that 412 and multiply that by the 2 or 3% that I talked about at the beginning of the video. Now some vegetables like cucumbers need a little bit higher, like 3%. Things like carrots need a little bit lower, like 2%. We found that sticking right in the middle of that at 0.25% works really well. So if we take that 412 gram total times 0.025, which is 2.5%, we get 10.3 grams. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a bowl and place it on the scale, and we're just going to pour the water back out of our jar. And we are going to zero out the entire thing, and then we are going to weigh out that 10.3 grams that we just calculated. And then you really want to get that salt dissolved before you dump it back into your vegetables. So just take a whisk and whisk it up until it's completely dissolved. Once you have your jars filled, just seal them up with whatever method that you're going to use. Now you're going to look at your jar in a day or two and the water is going to be cloudy. That's completely normal. That's supposed to happen. That's the breaking down of the enzymes, the lactic acid forming, everything in the process, the science is happening, and that's how it should look. Now this process is contained within a book called the Noma Guide, and it's important to read it. I'll link it in the description below. If you have any questions on the process, feel free to ask me in the comment section below. Now get to preserving your veggies. Have a great day. We love you. See you next time. Bye.